So this lecture is on arthrology, which means the joints, which are bone-to-bone connections. So when we talk about arthrology, it's the same root word arthro, meaning joint, that we get arthritis from, because arthritis just means arthro, joint, itis, inflammation. So this lecture is on arthrology, or the bone-to-bone connections. And we classify joints based on movement sometimes. If something is a synarthrosis, that means it is a non-moving joint. We can also say it is a synarthrotic joint, which is why we can change the name. Sometimes we don't want bones smooth, like your skull. Once it's finished growing and done, we don't want them to move. An amphiarthrosis means that it is a semi-moving joint, means it's somewhat flexible, like the intervertebral discs. You need them to be partially movable. A diarthrosis is a fully movable joint, like your fingers and your toes and your knees and your elbows. Those are diarthrosis. We also classify joints by structure. How did they get built? A fibrous joint, and I don't mean fibrous cartilage, I mean fibrous joint, holds together bones together by a combination of dense irregular and dense regular CT. All fibrous joints are synarthrosis. They do not move. A lot of times we just say it's dense CT because it's a combination or a mix of dense irregular and dense regular, so both. So we just say dense CT. Cartilaginous joints are held directly together by either fibrocartilage or hyaline cartilage. Some are synarthrosis, some are amphiarthrosis, and I realize I have an S, that should be an A, so it is an amphiarthrosis. Synovial joints, each synovial joint has 5 special characteristics, which is on another slide, and all synovial joints are diarthroses, so that's an A. So let's look at fibrous joints. There are 3 subtypes of fibrous joints. The first is a suture joint, which holds the skull together. It's only found in the skull. Gomphosis is also only found in the skull. It's how we hold our teeth in place. And there's a joint called a syndesmosis, which holds bones together, non-moving, synarthrosis, and it's anyone that's inferior to skull. Now, anatomists disagree on some things. The only one that all anatomists agree to is what we call the distal tibiofibular joint. It is just superior to the ankle. It's not the ankle itself. But other anatomists will include the interosseous membranes, which means there's like a ligament between your radius and your ulna and the tibia and the fibula. So those will also be classified as syndesmosis. So let's look at this. On this photograph, this is a plastic skull, which has had the suture joints inked in so you can see them better. The bones are held together with dense connective tissue. It's a combination of both types. It is definitely synarthrosis. You don't want them to be moving after they've done growing. And we are not going to learn the names of the sutures at this point, just be able to classify this as a fibrous suture joint. You have to include fibrous and you have to include suture. It's the full name. The fibrous gomphosis joint, this is a picture of the skeleton. The name actually means a peg in a socket, which is why it's the teeth. The teeth are held in place by a piece of dense, regular connective tissue called the periodontal ligament. Most books will classify this as a synarthrosis non-moving, although anybody who ever wore braces knows that your teeth can move at least somewhat. A fibrous syndesmosis is below the skull, right? They're held together with dense connective tissue. It's non-moving. What we need is at the distal end of the tibia and the fibula, we need those bones not to separate. And so we are superior to the ankle. And so this is a syndesmosis where we hold these bones together. And if somebody actually falls in such a way to tear these bones apart, they will literally have to be bolted back together surgically. Otherwise, the ankle just will never work right. So those are the fibrous joints. If I have a cartilaginous joint, we have one called a symphysis joint. And here we see that the bones are held together with no spaces by fibrocartilage. It is an amphiarthrosis, means it's somewhat movable and flexible. The example here is the photograph of the intervertebral discs. However, the pubic symphysis, that's why it's called a symphysis, is also fibrocartilage, and you will see a photograph of that in the document of joint photos that's a Word document. Cartilaginous synchondrosis, there's that chondro word again. You know it means cartilage. A synchondrosis joint, the bones are held directly together with no spaces by hyaline cartilage. Mostly they are synarthrosis. The exception is rib 1. Rib 1 to the sternum is an amphiarthrosis. The other ribs are not cartilaginous joints. Ribs 2 through 10 are synovial joints, but rib 1 is a cartilaginous joint, synchondrosis. The epiphyseal plate is considered a joint because we have 2 separate pieces of bone. This drawing is one from the lab where we have the epiphyseal plate showing this synchondrosis joint.